Okay, we'll make a start. So welcome everyone to this Executive Board meeting of the East India District Council. Welcome to officers, councillors, and welcome to Michelle Sachs from Boston, Phil Perry and Christian from Boston. You're very warmly welcome this evening. Councillor Martin, welcome as in your role as Scrutiny Chair. We have an apology from Councillor Grist, who is hoping to attend but might be late, so we'll mark him down as an apology until we know otherwise. My understanding is that everyone else is here, and just for clarity, I'll go through the list so that our support staff can pick that up. So obviously I'm here. Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
Second.
Councillor Ashton, can you just acknowledge you're here?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, I'm here.
Councillor Foster.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Fry. Councillor Fry, you're just muted for the moment.
Present.
Right.
Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
I'm here.
And Councillor Kurt, sorry, Councillor Grist, apologies, and then Councillor Kurt.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So we've got two lots of minutes to go through from the last two exec boards. So the exec board meeting on the 20th of May. Are there any comments or amendments to those minutes that anyone would like to observe? I'm taking silence as agreement that the minutes are accurate. Can I have a seconder for that then, please?
Yeah, I'll second those, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on then, just a show of hands or silence will denote that we're passing those. So I won't go through the list on those, but if anyone's got any comments. Okay, so we'll mark those as passed. Thank you. And then the extraordinary executive meeting on the 24th of June. Any comments or amendments to those minutes? No. Okay. Can I have a seconder then, please?
Happy to second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. And then again, silence will denote your acceptance of those minutes. Excellent. Is that appropriate, Rob, just to mark those as passed like that?
Yes, that's fine, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, action sheets. I believe that those are all completed. Anything to add, Rob?
No, just to confirm, Chairman, they're all marked as complete.
Thank you very much. And then moving on to agenda item 5, key decisions to be resolved by the Executive Board. So the first agenda item this evening is from Councillor Fry, that's the East India District Council Asset Review. Councillor Fry, the Zoom is yours.
Chairman, thank you very much. By way of introduction, in November 2018, we approved a strategy designed to help Council achieve financial sustainability. Contained within that strategy was the principle of commercialisation. This principle was applied as a function of the subsequent budget challenge, and indeed a number of proposals aimed at the adoption of a more business-like approach to various functions of the councils were identified. One of these was the proposal to establish a development company to be the receptacle within which purely commercial activities and initiatives could be taken forward, and with the intent of generating revenue to support the social responsibilities of council. In the intervening period, and with approval of council, we have formed the envisaged development company, agreed a preliminary business plan, established a shareholder board, appointed directors and staffed the relevant components of Invest East Lindsey. This report provides the motivation and background information to support the proposal for a feasibility study to identify the ways in which we can make best use of our assets to achieve the objective of generating revenue. And I'm therefore really pleased to introduce this report, as the activities of Invest East Lindsey remain a vital adjunct to achieving financial sustainability for the council. This is doubly so given the financial depredation caused by the current coronavirus pandemic. And now I will assume that you've all read through the report and have noted the summary and recommendations. And cutting to the chase, I am therefore asking for approval of this board for the development of 5-year housing programme as an integral part of the Invest East Lindsey business plan, together with your approval for the use of £250,000 from the Economic Development Reserve to support the feasibility study work in line with option E as detailed in Appendix B. And finally, for your agreement that a further programme update should be brought forward for consideration on completion of feasibility. Thus, in summary and more formally, following the formation of the Council's investment company, this report details the outcome of an initial review of ELDT assets and presents for consideration and for taking forward these from the delivery of a new build housing programme. The recommendations are, number one, that subject to the need for a wider consultation, that Executive Board approves the funding of £250,000 from the Economic Development Reserve Fund for costs in progressing the feasibility work on the potential use of council assets for housing delivery and capital income as part of the council's COVID recovery plan during the 2020-21 financial year. That Executive Board agrees to the development of an initial 5-year housing programme to be included as part of the development company business plan. That delivery of option E detailed in the report and at Appendix B be supported by Exec Board, and that Executive Board receives a further detailed report on the 5-year programme proposals following further appraisal and engagement with other areas of the council to examine the potential to bring forward affordable housing. The reason for all this is to enable the council's assets to be used to promote and contribute to housing delivery in East Lindsey. Chairman, I request the board's approval for the recommendations of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. This marks a new departure for this council in terms of the investor company, and I think it's a very important step that we're taking, and I for one quite happy to second this proposal. Are there comments from Exec Board members? I know we've talked about this in various briefings. Councillor Bowkett, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I would have seconded it if you hadn't have seconded it, but yeah, it's an exciting move forward for East Lindsey. I'm very excited to work with Councillor Fry, Andrew, Neil and Tim to move this forward. We've all got ideas for this. Obviously it is a company, so we are there to do a job as well, but I think it's an absolutely exciting thing that we're going to do. Pressing forward, building our own housing is what we're all about, or what we should be about. So I'm really excited about this prospect, and looking forward to the outcome of the findings of what they come out with. So looking really forward to it.
Thank you. Councillor Kirk, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Fully support this initiative. It's where we need to be, but I do hope that during this process and the work of the company, we will be pushing for some market housing on the coast. The current policy, which denies us any market housing, is killing the coast. It's really starving us of talent. It's starving us of people who want to come in to buy a nice new 4 or 5 bedroom executive type house. We just do not have that on the coast at the moment. We desperately need it. So I hope this and others can be a vehicle to challenge what's currently allowed and allow us to build some market housing on the coast.
Thank you, Councillor Kirk. I think you raised a very important issue, and I think one that actually will be accommodated within the report and the investigation, because of the nature of some of the existing housing commissions we already have on the coast, and see if we can take advantage of those. But equally, I think you're right, we need to challenge and understand the orthodoxy that's out there at the moment, but point well made. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like my colleagues, I'm extremely supported, and as Councillor Wendy Bowkett said, it is very exciting for us. As we've seen in the report, there are over 800 households who are waiting for accommodation for affordable housing. And to think that over a 5-year period, we could deliver nearly half of those homes for them, it is very exciting. And it's also good to see that we're making such great use of our existing assets of our own land. So I'm very supportive.
Okay. Any further comments from Exec Board colleagues? I can't see any hands raised, but I'm just looking visually on the screen if anyone wants to make any further comment. Okay, I'll take that to move forward. We have a proposal from Councillor Fry, seconded by myself and willingly seconded again by Councillor Beaufort. So we now go to the vote. And for this one, I will call out the voting just as it's such an important part of what we're going to be doing. So for myself, I'll be supportive. Councillor Marsh,
Yes, support, very much so.
Councillor Ashton,
Or
Councillor Beaufort,
For.
Councillor Foster,
Support.
Councillor Fry,
For.
Councillor Gray.
For.
Welcome, Councillor Grist.
Thank you. Apologies for being a few minutes late. I'd never heard of Zoom until a few months ago, and that seems to be all I do. So I'm furiously ending one Zoom to join this meeting. I'm fully supportive. I'll just take advice as to whether I can formally support, given I joined halfway through the discussion.
Okay.
But
Michelle, is that okay?
It's not a quasi-regulatory meeting, so therefore the same rules are not applied so stringently to a cabinet meeting. So I believe that Councillor Grist is able to vote in this matter.
Thank you. Councillor Grist.
well, more than happy to support then. Obviously, we've discussed it at briefing and numerous times before. So, yeah, fully supportive. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Kirk.
For.
Thank you very much. So that's supported. Thank you very much. We move on to agenda item 6 now, which is the financial performance for Q4. And I think Councillor Fry, you are up on the screen again.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. So this is details of our financial performance in Q4 of 2019-20. And essentially in this quarter, financial performance is similar to the financial component of the performance and governance reports with which we are all familiar, and it's laid out in a similar way. The only difference being that this report, as I've indicated, details the 2019-20 year end position. The report will be found on page 35 of our agenda, and the attendant supporting documentation is Appendix A on page 39. In summary, however, the report considers the financial performance of the Council for the period 1st of April 2019 to the 31st of March 2020. And the recommendations we find are, firstly, that Exec Board notes and approves the revenue positions for 2019-20, including a contribution from capital reserve of £199,616 as detailed in Appendix A, Table 1 and Appendix B. This means that we made an overspend of nearly 200,000 in the past financial year. This will be seen as recommendation F1, Appendix A, Q4 Finance Report 2019-20 on page 41. The second recommendation is that Exec Board recommends to Council to approve the use of the following reserves to fund a voluntary revenue provision to cover the reduced value of the Council's property funds. And we will be taking, or proposing to take, from the Investment Volatility Reserve, £1 million, and from the Business Rates Volatility Reserve, 428,625. This will be found as recommendation F2, Appendix A, Q4 Finance Report 2019-20, page 41. And just in support of this, I want to point out that by doing a voluntary revenue provision, we are setting money aside because the capital value of our investments has dropped. But this is likely to be a short-term position, bearing in mind these investments are made over a 50-year period. And the voluntary nature of the provision allows us to take the money back later on when the capital position recovers. So I fully recommend this course of action. The third recommendation is that Exec Board notes and approves the use of reserves as detailed in Table 3. And that recommendation is F3, again Appendix A, Q4 Finance Report 2019-20 on page 43. And finally, that Executive Board notes the 2019-20 capital position shown in Table 4 and agrees the changes required to the capital programme for 2020-21 as detailed in Table 5 and the revised capital programme for for 2020-21, which is £16,631,000 as detailed in Table 7, and this will be found as recommendation F4, Appendix A, Q4 Finance Report 2019-20, page 48. And the reason for all this is that we would wish to achieve our performance objectives. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And before I go rushing to second that, is there anyone who else would like to second this?
Yeah, I would be happy to second this one, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. So just picking up on your recommendations, Councillor Fry. As always, got to commend the management of our finances with yourself and your team, always very detailed and understandable, and no exception here. So given the challenges that we're facing, I'm quite happy to support this. So are there any other comments from colleagues? Okay, on that basis, we'll go forward to the vote then. So we have a proposal from Councillor Fry, seconded by Councillor Marsh. So going through the voting, I myself will be in favour. Councillor Marsh?
Yes, 4.
Councillor Ashton?
4.
Councillor Bowkett?
4.
Councillor Foster?
4.
Councillor Fry?
4.
Councillor Gray?
4.
Councillor Grist?
4.
And Councillor Kirk.
4.
Thank you very much. I just realised I keep saying Councillor Bokett's name differently each time I say it, so I do apologise. Moving on to agenda item 7. This is the carbon reduction plan. Quite an important piece of work for this council going forward, and one that we need to make sure goes forward. I'm just going to make sure that my plug is into my computer. So 2 seconds before I lose power.
Executive Board, we may have lost Councillor Leyland there. We just give him a few minutes to come back, and if he doesn't miraculously reappear, maybe Councillor Marsh will then go into talking about the report.
I think until Craig reappears, I've just reconnected. I'll assume the role of chairman and continue with this next item, if you're all in agreement. I take it you're all nodding your heads. Right, this one is the carbon reduction for the council. I'm going to try and get my minutes right here now. The council first produced a carbon reduction plan in 2009, and although it's always been the thought and consideration, we've never really driven it forward until recently, when we've appointed Sarah, who's with us tonight. Welcome, Sarah, as our carbon management officer, who's made some really good strides at getting this on the agenda and taking it forward. And the council is currently working with the Carbon Trust to develop a carbon management plan following a motion agreed on the 6th of March 2019. The scope of this work is to consider the carbon footprint of the council's direct operational assets and set out an agreed reduction pathway. And for technical reasons, now that the leader's back, I will give the chair back to him and continue.
Good evening.
The target for the council's emission reductions now needs to be set before the draft management plan can be finalised, and the carbon management plan itself will then be submitted to the Executive Board for approval in October this year, setting out the route to achieve the target. a little bit of the background to it is the motion was that the council resolves to reduce the use of its single-use plastic and other unrecyclable single-use waste, and to produce a carbon management plan for this council as soon as possible. And that's the exercise we're going through. The service of the Carbon Trust were engaged to undertake a carbon footprint assessment for all the council's direct operational assets, and to then produce a carbon management plan. The carbon management plan will consider a pipeline of projects for the authority to reduce its emissions and set out a pathway for reaching an agreed target on carbon and reduction. An interactive workshop led by the Carbon Trust was held on the 30th of June and was attended by the scrutiny panel members, officers and selected external individuals to explore options for the council's target and to discuss what a pipeline of potential projects could include. A net zero emissions target is aligned to scientific-based targeting, which is globally required to limit global warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius, and any hard to remove gases, medicines directly removed from that list in the air. This could, for example, include tree planting, creating an enhanced of salt marsh habitat, and direct air capturing technology. Lots of things that we're looking at to do. The recommendations for you today are that the Executive Board recommends the following carbon reduction target to Council, and this Council commits to reduce its carbon emissions to net zero by 2040. The government has stressed that it should be by 2050, with a minimum emission reduction of 25% by 2027. And we know that this is a stretched and challenging target, but we think it is achievable, ensuring it leads to an example to encourage others in the district as a whole to undertake similar steps. It also commits to a review of these targets in 2023 to ensure they are on track, and agrees that this commitment should be supported by an ongoing process of annual reporting and scrutiny. The reason that we've set the dates that we have, or I'm asking that we set the dates that we have and the dates that they are that, yes, they're challenging, but we think they're achievable. They coincide with the year after each re-election, so we aren't rushing to hit the target at the end of each cycle of authority, and it gives a seamless transition for the carbon work because it's so important to be carried on. We think that the 45% by 2027 is realistic because there is some clear wins to be made, and those include Manby and Skegness being redeveloped, and the new hub at Horncastle will greatly reduce our carbon footprint. New ways of working and the way that we're holding meetings, which has been accelerated because of COVID, means that there is an awful lot less travelling to and from meetings. Offices are working more remotely and more in a way that suits A, getting the job done, and B, not making additions to the carbon footprint. We've already, before the COVID-19, embarked on a paperless system or reducing paper massively, and this will reduce the amount of waste that the council puts out. The council reduction is based on three sets. Scope 1, which is the natural gas and our fleet, and these two are the two of the biggest carbon footprints that the council has, and we think that looking at and modernising that can make a really big impact. Scope 2 is about the electricity that we use, and again, that with the move to the hub at Horncastle and new ways of working will greatly enhance the reduction in carbon. And Scope 3 is the operational waste, employment, commuting and business travel. The latter two will clearly be greatly reduced if we go to more meetings like this. So I'll not say much more. If anybody's got any questions, I'll try to answer them. If I can't, I'm sure that Sarah can. But I know this is an ambitious target, but I would ask for your support so that we do try and reach our target by 2040, showing a great example to other businesses and organisations in the district. And I know that the overall carbon footprint that Great Britain causes is only about 2% of the world's. It really is about leadership and showing that it can be done. So unless any of you got any further questions, I would ask that you support this paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Sorry for disappearing. My laptop wasn't plugged in, but we're sorted, and you're also carrying on, which is great. Can I just, I'd be happy to second this paper because it was quite an important part of my first speech to council in 2018 when we got re-elected, 19 when we got re-elected. And I think this work, while we're going to be dealing directly with the impacts of how the council operates, I think there's a wider ambition that we should have as a council for our district. And this is obviously being picked up by government and also by partners as well. The greening of our environment and our workplaces and how we live and operate. So I think it's a very important paper going forward. And I think the challenge in terms of those targets is important. And I think the nearer we get to reaching those challenges, the targets, the last percentage reductions will be harder and harder to achieve. So I think that's quite a clever ploy, having that time frame to allow us to reach those final percentage points in terms of the ambition that we have. Any speakers on this, please? Any comments from colleagues? On the basis that it's such a good paper, then by the sound of it, it's going to go forward without any comment. But I think it is an important paper, and the agreement that we have around the council is not one of not making a comment because we can't be bothered. But actually, I think we've discussed this many times, and it's something that we have a true ambition for as an authority. And I know that Councillor Marsh and Sarah Baker will be taking this forward with gusto, because I think it's an important thing for us to do. Okay, on that basis, so Councillor Marsh has proposed it. I'm happy to second that. So if we go to the voting, I'm supportive. Councillor Marsh.
For.
Councillor Ashton.
For.
Councillor Beaufort.
For.
Councillor Foster.
For.
Councillor Fry.
For.
Councillor Gray.
For.
Councillor Grist.
Yeah, for. Extremely good paper. Happy to support.
Thank you, Councillor Grist. And Councillor Kirk.
For.
Okay, thank you. That's passed. And look forward to hearing updates and that as that goes along.
Can I just say thank you through you, Chairman? Can I just say thank you to Sarah for the work she's done on this? It really is a good paper, and I know there's an awful lot more work going on than what's shown here, as it will unroll and roll out to you. So just keep up the good work, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and a fair point actually. I think the agenda that's been set and the pace that's been set since your arrival here, Sarah, has been impressive. So please continue good work. Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 8, and this is the proposed local development order for Fantasy Island and Ingermells. And we have Councillor Ashton presenting this paper. Councillor Ashton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. What we have before us now is a draft local development order in respect of the Fantasy Island site at Ingermells, which seeks to give freedom and which seeks to allow the operators of that site to operate with a greater degree of freedom, with a view to encouraging investment by the operators, allowing them to to move the site, excuse me, allowing them to move, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I'm just having a bit of a writer's block here. Can you just bear with me a moment?
Of course, don't worry, no rush.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. I'll take it that board members have had the opportunity to review the papers that we've got in front of us. What it seeks to do is develop. I'm going to hand over to Paul to lead on the report because I'm making an absolute mess of this and getting myself tongue-tied. I'm terribly sorry.
Don't worry. Paul, do you want to just give a background to how this has got to this point for consideration by the exec board? That'd be really helpful. Thank you. You're muted.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I can't hear you.
So I'm just sorry, I'm not muted. No, I'm just asking Paul to pick up the comments that you've made and to just inform us where this is at. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, councillors. Good evening. We're on page 59 of your papers, and you'll see that there are two appendices. Appendix 1 starts on page 67, and that is the draft instrument, the actual draft local development order. And because it's granting planning permission for a whole variety of uses and activities, we do need to report to you all the representations so you can take them into account. And this has been a document and an activity that's been in discussion with Fantasy Island for a considerable number of months, and we hope that this is the peak of this process, and we'll be able to move forward on it after this evening. As I say, you need to take the representations into account. They start on paragraph 2.2 in the report and go on to 2.8, but I do have a number of representations that have come in since the report was finalised, and forgive me, Chair, I do need to go through them so that you take them into account. It's just worth very briefly pointing you to the last page of Appendix 1 because it's relevant to some of the representations. The last page of Appendix 1 gives some general conditions and limitations that any LDO is subject to. And you'll see in the first paragraph of that last page, a whole site flood risk assessment and flood warning and evacuation plan has to be submitted to and approved by the council before any parts of the order can be relied upon. And that becomes relevant when you consider the additional representations, Chair. So you have the representations to date in front of you. I'm afraid I have a list of things that I need to summarise with you, so I'll be as brief as I can, Chair. So first of all, we have additional representations from the Lincolnshire County Council Historic Environment Officer, replies that the site is within an archaeologically sensitive area and asks for a pre-commencement condition on any LDO for a scheme of archaeological investigation. I have suggested back to the officer that since the land is made up ground, it's been disturbed and resurfaced, and the resource has been there in various forms since the 1970s. I've asked for a bit more specific detailed evidence to justify that request, but I have not received a reply. The Environment Agency has replied with an objection. They suggest that the flood risk assessment should be required before any permission is granted to assess flood risk and propose mitigation. They say any permission would be contrary to the local plan. They say leaving it to a general condition has the danger that the agency might object to any subsequent FRA and any suggested amendments. And they say, regardless of the submission of an FRA, it objects to any permission to extend the season of caravans beyond the current open season. They then go through a number of detailed suggested changes to the drafting of the document, including the setting of finished floor levels, and that the FRA should relate to a whole number of uses. In response to that, Chair, we take the view that although, yes, there is a danger that the FRA may not be supported by the agency when it's received and the subject of consultation with them, then of course negotiation and the comments that they're asking to be added to the LDO that will be the subject of negotiation, and of course the council wouldn't approve the flood risk assessment until it's satisfied with it. So I think that is something that we can deal with through negotiation, because it can't be relied on until there is an approved flood risk assessment. The next comment, Chair, is from the Lincolnshire County Council Strategic Planning Manager, who wishes to object in the strongest possible terms. He believes that the proposal that seeks to balance risk with reward in such a vulnerable location needs to be rigorously justified, and East Lindsey Council has not done this. He says the LDO will remove controls around any form of development in a high risk, high consequent flood zone. He then goes into a detail, Chair, if you'll bear with me. On public health, he says that the LDO will put pressures on the National Health Service when they are traditionally stretched, and this needs to be balanced with robust infection prevention and control measures. Increasing tourists into the area will risk the transmission of COVID. Parks, he continues, will need to follow government advice on cleansing and distancing, and the numbers of people in caravans poses substantial risks to health and safety. He says plans must be in place to control localised COVID and other communicable disease outbreaks, and operators may need to impose lockdowns. The LDO, he says, is unviable if public health and safety are to be prioritised. On emergency planning, he says that the County Council has serious concerns over any attempt to increase the overall population, particularly out of season, and the County Council objects on the grounds of safety first. Unknown numbers in sites in temporary accommodation, he says, provide an unknown challenge for evacuation on the road network, and objects to the unquantified risk where there have been no cumulative impacts on the wider coastal flood risk and have not been addressed in the environmental impact assessment. And then finally, on the highways impact and flood risk network, he objects to the statement that the increase in visitor numbers and traffic as a result of the LDO is currently unquantifiable. The Highway Authority, he says, is unable to assess the potential impact on the network and requests a detailed transport assessment to determine whether the principle is acceptable. He says the TA needs to consider the overall parking provision, and he says one overarching flood risk assessment would not reflect specific changes and how, for example, SUD's principles are followed or enforced. In conclusion, the County Council recognises that we're seeking to assist economic recovery, and it wishes to work with us on the coastal strategy for the long-term development of this sector. However, he concludes, placing residents and visitors at risk is not something that he can support, and thus it leads to, quote, a full objection from the County Council. So responding to that, Chair, I think, first of all, the suggestions to do with the recovery after COVID are misplaced. This document, as I say, has been in discussion for many number of months. And of course, matters of public health and testing of visitors have got no reference to a local development order. It is true that we're unable to quantify the numbers of visitors or traffic generation, but of course, given that the site and the resort is there, there's an existing capacity and turnover, and the theme here is to give Fantasy Island some flexibility. Of course, they will not remove their car parks if it dissuades people from visiting them if they can't park themselves. And the request for a TA, by the same token, I think that will remain hypothetical, because the idea of the three zones that you see in the draft instrument is it gives them choice and opportunity, rather than it automatically following this. All of them will always follow. The head of conservation at Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust has made comments about what she'd heard about Pleasure Island, but we've pointed out that we're in Fantasy Island here, and Pleasure Island is in North East Lincolnshire. Natural England welcomes the EIA screening report and the Habitat Regulations Assessment. They say the LDO is unlikely to have any major impacts on the natural environment, And they also agree with the conclusions in the order that it'll be unlikely to have significant effects upon any European sites. And they say no further assessment under the habitat regs is required. There are four additional neighbour comments to report from 14 and 16 Seaview Estate, from number 2 the Quarry, and from Balkan Holdings on Edinburgh Avenue. They object on, they say that the proposal should go through the normal planning process so that they can register their views and those views could be taken into account. And they're not sure what will happen if Fantasy Island is given free range. Blue Anchor Leisure write in support of the LDO. They say, being the original developers of the resort, they truly understand the benefits and they think it will help all the operators there to improve the local economy. I've got 2 more, Chair, sorry. We have concerns from environmental health. They're concerned that the LDO would allow a range of activities that have the potential to create adverse effects upon the area and amenity. They say the LDO could allow noisy development anywhere over the 2 zones that could result in more noise to sensitive receptors. A sensitive receptor is a house. They say it can increase noise in late evenings and could include heating, cooling, fume extraction systems and service deliveries. The LDO, they continue, does not adequately assess how the proposals can avoid or mitigate impacts. This would result, they feel, in the council receiving increasing complaints about noise and nuisance compared to existing levels. They say it will have a notable and ongoing resource implication for environmental health officers, which will need to be investigated and solutions found. They consider there's a noise assessment or a background survey is needed to consider what the likely impact on residential and holiday amenity might be and what the operator might do to ensure there's no undue loss of amenity. In response to these comments, Chair, I can report that Fantasy Island are very happy to wait for any concerns that's expressed, depending on what aspects of any LDO they implement. They say they cannot do a blanket assessment for such activities or uses which might not be implemented. And they say, well, they will work with us as they do already, and they will understand that they need to mitigate and address any complaints as they arise. And then finally, Chair, we have a letter in support from the Pegasus Group on behalf of Fantasy Island. Pegasus Group are the planning advisors and they speak on behalf of the Mellors Group, who are the owners of Fantasy Island, and they say they fully support the LDO. Their wishes is that they are able to respond quickly to changing trends to provide a first-class all-year-round destination. This, they say, will boost the local economy, spend and job creation. The group, they say, provides headline attractions and high-quality events in the UK, Europe and the Middle East. And they so far, enhancements at Fantasy Island have secured 1,000 jobs and they've invested £10 million to provide cutting-edge experiences and accommodation. The LDO, they say, will give confidence to invest, to continue to draw people to the coast, and it says they have long-term ambitions to redevelop the site. The Lincolnshire LEP, they say, shows that the coast contributes £2.39 billion to the visitor economy, but productivity is low due to the seasonality of the offering. A priority, they say, is to thus provide a stronger visitor economy offer, and they say the LDO would remove a barrier to unlocking investment in line with the NPPF. Finally, Chair, I've got 2 more paragraphs. In commenting on the Lincolnshire County Council objection, they say this is not a short-term solution to COVID, as any public health concerns are not for the LDO to enforce. They say the FRA will provide parameters for sustainable drainage, emergency planning, and of course all development will have to accord with it before it commences. And they say all these separate applications on their own for these uses would not need transport assessments, and the Highway Authority will have to continue to manage tourism traffic in the area in any event. And then finally, on the Environment Agency objection, They say they have a well-established flood warning and evacuation plan. The uses cannot be implemented without it. It will not permit all round year occupancy. The site will be closed between the 6th of January and the end of February, and the probability of flooding is reduced due to the context of the site and the hard defensive seawalls that exist. And they say the flood warning and evacuation plans already exist for the site. That concludes the representations, Chair. The report does talk about suggested amendments in the light of trying to take into account comments, and I have nothing to add to that, and I hope I haven't been too lengthy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. That was very comprehensive, and I think that's very welcome. It explains the context of the objections and the comments. I think some of them are interesting in terms of actually this is an existing site that attracts traffic and a number of visitors, and to suggest that actually this is going to overwhelm capacity out of seasons is quite interesting, given that we're all aiming to extend the season. So I'll leave my comments there. I'll just go back to Councillor Ashton. Do you want to make any further comments before I go to speakers?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My apologies to Executive Board colleagues for having completely lost my thread, tripped over myself and not known really whether I was coming or going. Thank you very much, Paul, for having rescued me on this one. But also I'd say very publicly a huge thank you to Paul for the work that you put into this report right from its very inception, and the same comments in respect of Tim and your input. This is something that we have taken forward on the initiative originally coming from the owners of Fantasy Island in the form of Mellors Group, who, as Paul has outlined and as they have explained in their submission to us, are a major player in the entertainment and theme park industry, with operations across Europe and the Middle East. So these are a significant player, a significant investor in East Lindsey. And it's on their initiative that we've looked to develop a means of enabling them to invest with greater flexibility and greater confidence going forward. And to just give additional assurance in respect of some of the objections that have come in, some of which are deeply disappointing and feel, in my view, to range a long way from what are material planning considerations. The stuff regarding COVID is nothing to do with the local development order. This is something which is dealt with at a national government level. And it's also worth pointing out from the Pegasus letter that we've received that the managing director of the Mellors Group, Edward Mellors, sits on the government body advising the Department of Culture, Media and Sport on COVID recovery in the tourism sector. So not only does COVID really not come into this in a planning matter, if it did, we are dealing directly with people who are seriously professional and knowledgeable on the subject. In respect of the Environment Agency comment, I would observe that in the case of Zone 1, the area outlined in the papers before us, which is the car park and caravan and lodges area, this area already has planning permission confirmed. It's an old site. If you look at it on Google or Apple Maps, you'll see that it's quite an old site. It has planning permission through to the end of November. It's already one of those sites which has a occupancy permission for longer than the regular March to October that we're familiar with. So in effect, running this through to the 5th of January is an incredibly modest extension of 35 days of operation that takes in Christmas and New Year, alongside what is clearly and demonstrably a significant local attraction. So taking in the round the comments of the County Council and the Environment Agency, what I would say is what we are looking to do through this local development order, while it is ambitious and looks to encourage investment, what it does in reality is significantly more modest than some of these comments might give the impression of. In respect of environmental health, it's worth bearing in mind the baseline of what already exists on that site, and the activities that already are permitted on that site through planning permissions that have already been granted. And it's also worth bearing in mind that by granting planning permission or by granting a local development order, a local planning authority does not give permission to create a nuisance. And environmental health here, we have a fantastic team that I have every confidence have the powers that they need to ensure that any nuisance arising is dealt with in the correct fashion and quickly. But ultimately, the final safeguard, if there are any members of Executive Board concerned about the nature of what we're embarking on, the final safeguard is the conditions that we include in this local development order that allow for us as the planning authority to modify or revoke the local development order if there are unforeseen circumstances, if it operates in a way that it wasn't intended, or if hypothetically the operators didn't operate the local development order in the spirit with which we are expecting them to do. So these safeguards are fundamentally built in to the papers that we have before us. And I think it represents a positive step by East Lindsey to say to this local business in particular that East Lindsey is open for business, that it is encouraging of development and investment in the coastal economy. And I would formally move the recommendations on page 60, recommendations 1 to 4, and just add that because the reason for the recommendations that we have is that the consultation is technically still live until midnight tonight. Paul and the team have worked at a frenetic pace to bring this forward and to get this together and get this to board tonight. And because of the timescales we've got when the next executive board might be and so on and so forth, that's the reason for that caveated recommendation. The caveated recommendations that we've got is so that we can take into account theoretically any submissions that we receive between this meeting and midnight, which we legally have to do because this is a planning decision that effectively we're taking, and we have to give regard to every submission and address any concerns that are raised. So I'll leave that there, Mr. Chairman, and move the recommendations 1 to 4 as written.
Thank you. I'm actually quite happy to second that. We'll go to our speakers now. Councillor Fry.
Chairman, thank you very much. I support this local development order and all that Tom has said, in fact, and I fully agree with Paul Edwards' rebuttal of the objections. As a previous portfolio holder for planning, in 2017, Craig and I attended a Fantasy Island development plan presentation, which was genuinely exciting. We agreed to work with Fantasy Island at that time to put in place the relevant development order. And certainly in view of the need for to promote economic recovery, given that that was 3 years ago, all I want to say is let's get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fry. Next speaker is Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chairman. Just briefly from me, local development orders have been in use along the coast for quite a long time. I can remember a time in a previous life when Butlins down the road got an LDO, and it allowed them to be fleet of foot to move with the times, and they invested substantially with not having to come forward every touch and turn for every brick they wanted to turn over and every footpath they wanted to lay. And look at the outstanding business that is continued to be. I think this can only be a good thing to allow Fantasy Island to be more fleet of foot, to give them the confidence to invest, to move forward modern things. And as for being afraid of noise impact, goodness me, I can remember 20, 25, 30 years ago going down there when the first white knuckle rides came out. I didn't realise people could scream so loud. I don't think it's changed much since then in noise at Worth. I'm just very disappointed in some of the objections, and from where they've come from, it almost feels conspiratorial. And I just hope that we pass this and they go from strength to strength and keep increasing our tourist offer, keep increasing the number of people that come here and enjoy our coast, and keep increasing the job opportunities for our young people and older people who come to live here. It's just outstanding. It's amazing that the objections that's been raised in the way they are. So fully support from me. I think they're doing a great job in planning, and just get on and let's get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Councillor Kirk.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, can I echo the statements there of Councillor Marsh? The LDO is needed. They are a major player on the coast and they want to do so much more. And it does seem to me, well, frustration gets to anger when you start reading objection after objection from the same authority. It's as if somebody's walked down the corridors at County Hall, knocking on doors, saying, please, can you write an objection? Doesn't matter what grounds, just anything, just get an injection in. I've got to say, I'm really disappointed that other authorities can't work with us to drive forward the coast. A reputation that we have, that's why developers come to us directly, because we know that we deliver. It's a shame that other authorities don't want to work alongside us, would actually rather work against us. Very disappointing, very annoying. 100% support this. It's the right thing to do because we are serious about driving forward the coastal economy.
Thank you, Councillor Kirk. Councillor Grist.
Thank you, Craig. Well, the previous two speakers have said everything I want to say. We should be welcoming this now more than ever post-COVID. We have a duty as an authority to embrace any opportunity that comes along in terms of boosting the local economy, supporting tourism, creating jobs. And as far as I can see, this does all of those things, or it provides the opportunity to do all those things. So I'm rather surprised and disappointed myself with some of the comments and objections. And I think we should just fully support it and move on and do all we can to drive our economy forward.
Thank you for that. I think there's been a lot of good points being made this evening. I think one of the things that I have to consider, and just Councillor Price's comment about reminding me about the meeting that we had with Fantasy Island, and they were very keen to progress things, and at that point we were equally excited about what they were potentially going to do, and we're now at a point of making something happen. I think the scale of the operators and the quality of the operators and their potential is very great, and I think that should give us some assurance about where we are this evening. The other thing I would mention as well is the point that Paul Edwards made about the FRA being judged by us, and there are safeguards there in terms of the quality of what we're asking them to do in terms of the flood resilience, in terms of the evacuation plans, all those things. They are competent professional operators and they would not be putting their visitors at risk. And I hear the comments about our partners and their comments about this. I think we've got to look at where we are now and move forward with them to make sure that this does work. I think everything that's been proposed here actually is nothing that's not been on the table before in terms of looking to extend the season over Christmas, looking how we manage flood evacuation, and if we can work with those partners to make sure that that works really well in the exemplar case, which that being Fantasy Island, being professional, competent company, I think that's the best starting place for us. So I think the work that's been done by previous portfolio holders, Councillor Fry, even myself in the role which Councillor Fry took over on, and Councillor Ashton, officers involved in this, Paul Edwards and Tim Leader. I would thank them all for their efforts, and of course Fantasy Island for their confidence in wanting to progress this. So we have a proposer and a seconder, and we will now take the vote. So I will be supportive. Councillor Marsh?
For.
Councillor Ashton?
For.
Councillor Beaufort?
For.
Councillor Foster?
For.
Councillor Fry?
For.
Councillor Gray?
For.
Councillor Grist?
Yep, 4.
And Councillor Kirk?
For.
Thank you. So I think this is quite a milestone decision for this council in terms of how we progress our businesses along the coast. So well done, thank you. Right, we're now moving on to agenda item 9, which has been withdrawn. That'll be coming back to the exec board. There will be briefings directly, I think, with those councillors involved in this process. So moving on to agenda item 10. There are 2 procurement notices, request forms for noting. Unless anyone's got any comments or objections, they are there for observation and noting. I will take silence as agreement that they are noted and go through. Okay, thank you. I'm now zipping back to the previous paper. Technology. Right, we're now coming up to potentially some exempt information, and I think it's something that we need to consider, and I'll ask colleagues to vote on the matter. So we're going to consider excluding the public and press for the following items, and if appropriate, the chairman to move, and that's me obviously, but under section 100A.4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the following item on the grounds that if they were present, they could be disclosed to them information as defined in paragraphs 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act as amended. So I would like to take a vote that we exclude or effectively end the live streaming and exclude members of the public via that process. So can I just, I will support we go into closed session. Councillor Marsh?
Yep, support.
Councillor Ashton?
For.
Councillor Beaufort?
For.
Councillor Foster? Councillor Foster? 4. I can lip read, thank you. Is that enough? Yeah, I'll take it that we've agreed there. Councillor Fry?
For.
Councillor Gray?
For.
Councillor Grist?
4.
And Councillor Kirk?
Well, before I vote for, can I make a suggestion that we actually move agenda item 13 up the agenda, which is a date and time of next meeting, because that obviously doesn't need to be exempt.
Very true. Good observation. I was waiting for someone to spot that. Thank you.
Well, I'm trying to stay awake. I'm trying to stay awake, Mr. Leader.
Sorry, I watched too much Dad's Army. So, right, we'll go to the date of the next meeting, and that will be on the 23rd of September at 2020. So now we move into exempt phase. Yeah. Joanne.
I just confirm, Chairman, that I'm just going to stop the live stream.